HR Unboxed with Natalie and Faye.
So here we are, welcome to episode 7 of HR Unboxed, and this episode is called The Good, The Bad and The Office Beef. And that's because we're talking grievances today with Natalie and Faye. Hello.
Hi.
How are you
Good morning,
doing?
Chris.
Excellent, it's good to see you both again, and today is going to be another juicy one. Last episode was super juicy. We got lots of feedback about levels of juiciness, but today we're going to delve even more into the stuff that goes on behind closed doors of the world of HR, and today it's all about grievances, which I guess is kind of the thing that you spend a lot of your time doing when people have got some kind of issue with somebody that they work with.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a big difference between what is a grievance and what is a gripe. And when Faye and I talk about grievances, which, to be fair, we could talk about it all day long because they just happen more often than people realise. But people, as in companies, don't actually manage them well. And that's where we start to see risks coming out. So that's really what we wanted to address within this episode, really.
So that's like the main thing is how you deal with the grievance, because grievances are going to happen in every workplace. It just happens. It might be somebody's borrowed your stapler and not given it back, or somebody's got a serious issue. And, you know, some of these gripes, some of these grievances, we'll talk about the difference, but it's an unavoidable part of office life, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. And, you know, it's not all tea and biscuits, HR. Sometimes it does get serious, and this is where, you know, it could be fun, it could be less fun. Yeah. And it matters. It matters a lot to people. And what might seem trivial to us sat in a cozy studio is things that people, you know, go home worrying about, losing sleep over, and it can ruin your day. It can ruin your office life. So it really does matter, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And knowing how to actually address it as an individual, but also how to handle it as a company. So it's about getting the process right, making sure that people know when to deal with a grievance, because more often or not it's overlooked and just seen as, oh, you know, Dave's having a bit of a whinge. I know we speak about Dave a lot on the podcast, but
this is no one specific, is it? This is just virtual Dave.
Virtual Dave. It's not all Starbucks and podcasts, Chris.
It's not all Starbucks and podcasts, although today it is all about the podcast. Okay, so we're going to start off with bias, and bias is something that people really do pick up on. So you've got to make sure as a manager that you're treating everyone the same. It's actually fair. You don't have favourites. You don't have people that you label as troublemakers, because this is where that perception of it being unfair really creeps in, doesn't it?
I think so. So majority of the time, if somebody puts a grievance forward, it's because they've experienced an issue or something that they obviously want to get off their chest. And whether that is a grievance, a gripe, or whatever that looks like, it is important to that person, and that's what needs to be factored in. So, excuse me. So whether this is, you know, this is not seen to be taken so serious because you think someone's just being overly sensitive, or this person is just typically that type of way because they've always got something to say on a Monday when they come in. Sometimes it still has to be seen and taken within the process, and can't just be almost brushed under the carpet to think, oh, here they go again, or that's just their way. Sometimes it is for managers and people to take that person aside and say, so what's the crux of the issue? Because you can't continue like that. It's not nice for anybody.
Is it important to kind of identify the people that are crying wolf, that are always moaning about something, and they're kind of moany minis? Is that an HR term? And kind of separate them from people that have got genuine grievances, or just sometimes just people have this whingy personality. They're sort of Victor Meldrew types where just everything, I don't believe it.
Yep.
The coffee's run out again. And people that have genuine grievances. There's a difference, isn't there?
There absolutely is. I mean, we can see sometimes that, you know, we'll have employees and they will pick at everything and anything, and it will just keep coming in waves. And once we feel that we've addressed one thing, they could openly come to us with a grievance, and then we look to you know, kind of button that out. What does that look like? And then upon that grievance, they then start stacking and they cite other grievances. And then before we know it, we've got a catalogue of about 10 instances of all things that they've either not sort of mentioned before, or additional gripes, and say, oh yes, but on Wednesday, you know, so-and-so went in the fridge and, you know, took my yogurt. Oh, and then this happened, and then my bin didn't get emptied, and then this. And before you know it, it kind of snowballs. Yes. And we're thinking, crikey,
Yeah.
You know, we didn't realise you had all this pent-up emotion about all these office gripes that can become a bigger thing. Absolutely it can, but we do need to kind of sit down and understand that, and you're only going to get that from conversation.
Sure, and then there is the whole angle where people will continuously do this, and when they do, you have to question as an HR professional, well, is this potentially vexatious in some way? Is it that somebody's got a little black book in their desk and they're writing everything that somebody has wronged them today, or you know, something hasn't been quite right? When Faye refers to the bin situation, we've actually had a grievance raised because their bin wasn't emptied, and it wasn't on multiple occasions. It was once between Christmas and New Year when the cleaners were off, and they were aware that the cleaners were off, but they were very disgruntled that they had to empty their own bin. So, you know, it can be something little like that, but then it's difficult because you can't pass judgment on, well, is this a genuine issue? Is there something underlying here? Or is there something, you know, where they are just a bit of a moaning Minnie and they do have, you know, it's just their way in some respects. So, yeah.
So do you have to go through and unpick it and basically, right, let's write down all the things that you've got beef about, and let's say, right, okay, this isn't really an issue, this is a gripe. Okay, item number 4, now this is a serious issue, can we talk about this?
Yeah, absolutely. We do have to go through their bullet points, and then we kind of see what we would class as if it's upheld. And if it is upheld, then they're the things that we do need to deal with. Obviously, if we dismiss every complaint, we could be opening up to other legal issues because we don't know what that looks like and what it can lead to. So obviously, if somebody tells us that their bin wasn't emptied, then, you know, that is kind of, it could be just one anomaly, it hasn't been done for a reason, but has it kind of hindered, or is there recourse for the company? Not very likely. If somebody comes to us and they're saying that they're being picked on and bullied by their manager, however, and it's a series of these events and the manager made sure their bin wasn't emptied, we now have a different conversation.
Yeah, so it does come down to that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We do have to pick it apart. We wouldn't be doing ourselves any favours as HR practitioners whether we just overlooked it or whether we decided to just, you know, do bits of it. I'm very much a believer as that those small details can actually get you to the bottom of the key issue that's going on. Yeah. So we are very open-minded when we go into these things, because otherwise, one, we're not doing our jobs properly, but two, we're not being accountable for what our profession essentially stands for. I don't mean to get all professional on people, but you know, there is a reason why we do the job in the way that we do it. So we make sure that all of those angles are covered, because knowing our luck, if you do overlook that little detail, then that could leave our client exposed. So we do have to look at it very, you know, thoroughly and pull out all of the points. And then as you work your way through the grievance itself with the employee, you often find actually we are now aware of what the issue is, and these are the steps that we can take to resolve it whilst protecting the company and resolving it for the employee. So it all goes very much hand in hand.
Do you think sometimes the employee can't really articulate what the issue is, and they're saying, oh, my bin wasn't emptied, but what they really mean is that they've been singled out, or there might be some other kind of big underlying issue, but they can't really explain what it was, so they list the symptoms rather than the cause?
Yeah, definitely. We see that quite often, don't we, where people aren't able to articulate themselves in the way that they possibly intend to. So that's why a good quality investigation is really important, because then you can get them to express themselves in a way that they then feel comfortable to let you know what those details look like, because it might just be a bin being emptied, but like you said, what if it is a catalogue of things and it then comes or becomes a collective picture? So these are the elements that we're always looking at. And when Faye and I give advice, what we have is actually checklists in our head. So we're going through it and we're like, well, actually, is it this way, or is it potentially that way? Is that something else we've got to explore? And then once we get to the end of that, we are satisfied that we've done what we need to do. But that's pretty much how it's like having a million tabs open in here. So we just have to work our way through what that actually looks like. It's not about getting the right outcome for the client. It's about getting the balance right and making sure that we are adhering to policies, procedures, and all of that lovely stuff. And of course, the law.
And of course, make sure that you get rebooted once a day, because otherwise you're going to run out of memory and your processor just not going to be able to cope with all those tabs being open.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're getting so much, and especially with all the changes coming in employment law, saying that the level of responsibility on businesses is increasing massively. So Faye and I we're attending probably about 2 or 3 webinars a week at the moment to keep updated with what is happening, so that we can translate it and make sure that our clients are protected. So there is a lot of change on the horizon, and we just need to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to make sure employers are acting responsibly and that they don't find themselves in what we call the HR hot water, because it escalates really quickly and becomes quite expensive.
It's good that you've been installing your updates then. Yeah, 'cause that can really slow down your processor. Okay, so can we kind of play out an example of where a manager had a favourite employee and there were maybe 2 people with a gripe that weren't being treated fairly?
Yeah, this is Faye's case. This is one that she's handled. So obviously it's anonymised, of course, full disclosure before she gets into it.
So in terms of favouritism in the workplace, we can't say it doesn't happen, because it absolutely does. And some managers might say no, that's rubbish, I like all my team fair. But sometimes throughout the working week, the month, and the time people have been there, you can quite clearly see who's favourite and who isn't. That just is, and I think it happens more than we probably know. If then there was a grievance to be raised, and then that manager decided that I'll hear this person out, but the person that it was about is one of their favourite, we can quite quickly see how that is going to play out. And sometimes that does leave the process open to it not being impartial. So these are other things that we need to be really careful of, because we need to make sure that we're having a clear, objective view of what is going on with that particular grievance. You cannot just say categorically, well, I know Dave, I know he wouldn't have done that. Your grievance is not upheld. I don't believe anything you're saying. Underlying because he's my favourite, but without being said. And then it comes out that this poor person with their grievance has had to be kind of like brushed aside, and there's no kind of urgency to address what is going on in the workplace. It's so important to treat everybody consistently and fairly, and especially with this process, male, female, shoe on the other foot, especially when we see sexual harassment or any type of harassment cases. As soon as a female has had that done to them, absolutely, everybody kind of jumps on it and defends the female. When sometimes we see it shoe on the other foot, workplaces aren't so quick to act.
Yeah.
And we know that. And it's really unfortunate, but we have to maintain that consistency and see it through. Processes, best practice, whatever that looks like, male, female, senior manager, the team in general, it has to be fair and consistent. Do not pick until you know the full story.
The one thing that Faye and I think it's really important to note that a lot of the cases that Faye and I deal with, I would say 90% of them, in terms of sexual harassment, are women towards men, not the other way around. So we often see this dominant male figure in pictures outlined in the media, and the big bad man comes along and sexually harasses all the women. It doesn't actually work that way. The cases that Faye and I are handling are actually quite extreme cases of women harassing men, but you find that men will often not raise it because they don't feel that they're going to be taken seriously. And it's something that Faye and I really drum home to our clients is, well, actually, if this was a woman, would you be allowing that behaviour to continue, or would you manage it? So that's really the scene or the scenarios really that play out, and the angle that we come from.
And also a lot of it is down to power imbalances, and with hopefully more women getting into positions of leadership and power, then you can see how this kind of mismatch is going to be a lot more on the other side than what people kind of think.
Yeah, I think so. And we're seeing a lot, like you say, it's good that women are getting involved in more of the senior leadership management roles, but we have to practice what we preach. So we have to make sure that we are acting as we would want to be seen and behaving in a way that is representative of the positions that we hold. So being responsible and, leading by example is the phrase that always springs to mind.
What fascinates me is how you can tell the difference between a genuine grievance and a gripe. So is there kind of a definition of what counts as a grievance and what counts as a gripe? Do you have kind of like a list somewhere, or is it a bit more nuanced than that?
It comes down to evidence. I hate to be a bit Judge Rinder about it, but it comes down to evidence, doesn't it? And it's what can we see and what can we prove and disprove? So we always have that in mind and have a look at what is actually being presented to us, because often people will come into a grievance situation filled with emotion, and they will really drive that home and say, well, I feel this way. Okay, but why do you feel that way? So when an employee raises a grievance, it's very important that they are very clear on what that actually looks like, because if you don't have that, you don't have that evidence to back it up, then it becomes what we call a he said, she said situation, or a 50-50. And then you can't prove or disprove either way. And the problem with that situation is that, well, it's great for the employer in ways because they're like, well, actually, there's no evidence to substantiate either way. However, the employees on either side of the table that have gone through grievances are stressful. On either side of the table, they are really stressful. So when people are putting themselves through this process, those relationships, can they be salvaged afterwards? That's the other thing, because you find a lot of the cultural side of the organisation is then kind of fractured. So you're then having to look at, well, actually, are there ways and means to be able to repair this? Because it's all well and good that Dave and Susan can't work together, but if you put Susan somewhere else, then she's going to be like, well, why have you moved me somewhere else and not Dave? Why is it that, Dave gets to stay where he is and I don't? And then it comes down to, well, actually, you can't manage everybody's personalities, but what you can manage as an employer is the conduct, how they actually behave. Because if they refuse to go into meetings, this is quite common, isn't it? We see, oh, I'm not going into that meeting because such and such is in there and they make me feel uncomfortable. People believe that if they use the term, you're making me feel uncomfortable, that automatically that gives them a free pass to just not be a part of what the organisation is asking them to do. And it's not. So it's really important to manage that expectation and to make sure that you're continuously monitoring that situation long after the process is concluded.
I think it's easy to be lazy with these things and just give in and say, okay, yeah, fine, don't go into that meeting. If they make you feel uncomfortable, that's fine. But really, that's opening up a can of worms, isn't it? If you start pandering to it, then you're kind of endorsing their feelings, aren't you?
Yeah, and then you're setting that expectation going forward. So Dave might say, oh, well, myself and Susan's case was handled differently to Paul and Shirley's, so they do have different ways of how, if you manage it in different ways, then you're being inconsistent with your approach. And the problem with that is that other employees notice. They do notice, and when they do, they're like, I can use this to my advantage. So again, it comes down to employers not cutting corners so that they don't leave themselves open for anything that may come their way afterwards.
Now, last episode, the real life quotes was a huge hit. People loved the genuine quote stories. So we've got a couple here to help us kind of explain the difference between a gripe and a grievance. So we're going to do example number 1, and then you can tell me what your sort of thought process is of deciding, is this a gripe or is this a grievance? Let's play gripe or grievance. Number 1. Okay. I work in an open plan office, and every time I leave my desk for lunch, I come back to a passive-aggressive post-it note from my colleague about something ridiculous, like the way I type too loudly, or that my desk plant is too fragrant. I've asked them to just talk to me directly, but the notes keep appearing. Is this just an office gripe, or do I have a real grievance? And these are anonymous notes as well, so unless we can do some graphology analysis to kind of work out who's leaving these notes.
Who sent them?
Yeah.
Okay, so to break this down, initially I would see this as an office gripe. I would. First and foremost, obviously, this person has got a real issue with this, what this other person is doing. They're eating, or what are they doing? Typing too loudly, and the desk plant is too fragrant. I'm curious what the plant is. I've asked them to talk to me directly. That's a good start, because before a grievance, we could look to kind of mediate the situation. If you have an issue, the first step is talk about it. it's so common with us that we'll have a grievance come through, we'll pull that other person that it's against into a meeting and say, do you know why you're here? And they have no clue. They don't know what's been going on. They don't even know there's been an issue with Dave across the room. Have that conversation initially and kind of be open to that informal process to kind of nip it in the bud before you have to go through the formal grievance procedure, because it can happen. If you can kind of go to your manager and say, I've been receiving these post-it notes, I'm not too happy, I don't feel that there's a problem, no one else seems to have come forward because assumably the handwriting is from the same said person, then I'm kind of thinking maybe the manager could pull people in and actually just mediate what that looks like. Let's possibly remove the plant, I don't know, but typing too loudly, you're in an office, that's going to happen. I don't feel that it constitutes a formal grievance, in my opinion. I think that's an office gripe. What do you think, Natalie?
Yeah, that could definitely that could be solved informally, I think. Yeah. But, why be anonymous? If you've got an issue with someone, I would, one professional to another, you'd raise it. I've raised it several times with people that I've worked with over the years, but you can do it politely, and we are all adults.
Yeah, but you say that your job is to have awkward conversations, and I think a lot of people don't like that. They hate confrontation, and for me, if I didn't like the smell of my friend's plant, I'd feel a bit awkward saying that to them. And it might not be their plant; it might be something a bit more personal, like their feet. Oh my god, I went on the radio and I said my housemate's feet stink and it puts me off my spaghetti bolognese because he sits next to me and it smells worse than the Parmesan cheese, and he heard me say it on the radio, and yeah, it was really awkward. He came in the room and he was like, "Oh, how are my feet today, Chris?" I was like, he just like slammed something down on the table and then stormed out. It was really awkward.
That's the way to get it out there though, Chris. That was your way.
It was a terrible way to do it, to broadcast it across the airwaves, but it worked. I mean, his feet smell a lot better after that. Nice. But what I'm saying is some people don't like that confrontation.
No. And to be honest with you, we don't. And I know that sounds a bit weird because we deal with it all the time, but in some ways it's good that we don't like confrontation and that we do feel that awkwardness that our clients feel, because then we're able to actually deliver what we deliver in the right way, and it comes from a good place rather than it being, right, we're out to get people, which is often the perception of HR. So it's good for us to have that apprehension. And, I've been doing it nearly 20 years now. So when I'm sat here and I'm going, well, it's quite easy to have a difficult conversation, it never is, whether it is about smelly feet or if there is a gripe about somebody having a fragrant plant or something, addressing it in a way that is polite can seem quite difficult, but we have ways and means and techniques that we can use to be able to get the best of that situation. Even if you are delivering negative or also what we call bad messaging, such as like at the moment there's loads of redundancies and things like that, there are ways and means of being able to address it in a way that comes from good intent rather than it being, oh, well, it is what it is. It comes across as insincere that way. So having that sincerity around it is really, really important. And it shows that we care as well.
Absolutely. Okay, shall we do story number 2?
Yep.
Okay, this is the case of the mystery pay gap. I recently found out that my male colleague who does the exact same job as me is making significantly more money. I brought it up with my manager and they told me it's just the way things worked out when he was hired. They won't even discuss adjusting my salary. Is this something HR should step in on, or am I just out of luck?
Ooh, it depends how big the gap is. I mean, they're saying it's significant from that wording. So when we're looking at pay gaps, yes, people can negotiate a wage when they join a new company because, well, why wouldn't you? And the only kind of advice that we give our clients in this respect is that to have a salary grading, so that you've got a banding within which those salaries sit, because then at least you're within the grading, and therefore, yes, it may not be the exact match for people that have been there longer, but it is up to the company to look at rewarding its long-serving employees. It might be that it's a critical role. I don't know what the role is in this case, but if there is a critical role, try hiring a payroll person. they are like a unicorn at the moment. You can't actually hire them. They're like gold dust. So, you know, the salaries are becoming uber competitive for these people. It's the same within the construction industry. If you try and find someone in a trade, my goodness, they are really difficult to get. So with roles and differences in these sorts of things, quite rightly so, they can bring it up, and obviously that's why we have gender pay gap reporting, and why we have these equal rights in the workplace. So if this person does feel genuinely down on their luck and that they haven't been rewarded for either longevity or that they've been overlooked for a pay increase, because you don't know, we only see this in a 2D way, and one thing that I'll be looking at will actually, yes, they may be doing the same job, but is it the same responsibilities? Does this person have more because they've been there longer? Might be the same job title, but are the responsibilities the same? So I really pick it apart to have a look and see, well, actually, is there something here that we're missing? Is there a reason why this person hasn't had that? And that's exactly how we would address it. So in that respect, I would say, yeah, it's a potential for a grievance there.
So what should you do if you've got to push the boat out to hire someone because you're desperate to fill a post and you're ending up paying your new recruit more than the existing ones? Do you then need to bump everyone's salary up to match?
I think that you need to either be justified in your approach, because this will happen. So just, you know, if this comes out and people can talk about their salary, whilst obviously you can kind of suggest that I would prefer if you didn't, you can't reprimand somebody for talking about their salary in the workplace. So for that reason alone, if that come out, what does that look like? Because you don't want to go starting to upset the apple cart. If you've got a good team and then a newbie comes in and they're already on hire, how is it justified? Did they negotiate? That's fine, but what does that look like for an increase to the other guys that have been there? And also, you can't base this solely around sex. So in terms of male and female counterpart, if you're sat there doing the direct, you know, on the same bench, say, and you're doing the same role, then why are you not paid the same? That is, yeah, I don't see how you can justify, you know, saying that the male gets more than the female for that. That's not right.
Chris is starting to look at us as if we've got like a million kind of dilemmas going in our head at the moment. And this is how we actually debate out in the office, is to say, well, actually, what's the detail behind it? And, you know, is there a reasoning behind it? What's the business case for that particular salary being offered? So we really do pull it apart. So I wish we could just go, yep, gripe, that's grievance, that's a gripe, that's a grievance. But we have to go through these measures, and you know, that's what people pay for in terms of expertise, because it's not just us giving advice because we know it, it's because we have to go by process of elimination whenever we approach a particular subject. So yeah, gosh, that's an interesting one though, isn't it? What do you think, Chris?
What do I think? I think I can see exactly how that would happen, and it is really hard to recruit people, but at the end of the day, you've just got to be firm about what you can afford to pay, because if you blow all the budget paying somebody new, you've not got that money left to give everyone a pay rise, which you'd like to do. I think most employers would love to pay their staff loads of money, but the business can't always support it, and it's better that the business keeps going than everybody ends up getting made redundant in 6 months because you've run out of money.
Yeah. Well, at least you know you've got a career in HR now, Chris.
I know. I'm going to be such an expert after all these podcasts. I think I'd be terrible though, because I just start laughing in HR meetings because I wouldn't be able to keep a straight face.
No, we do. We have to be quite serious. I know we have a lot of fun on the podcast and things like that, but when Faye and I are addressing serious issues, we have to be really. Yeah. So when we do we've worked with some of our listeners, and they're like, wow, when we've actually had to work with you, we're surprised at how...
switch on the serious.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, it's like a switch, and we're like, no, that's really bad. So we need to look at that and manage and mitigate that risk. So yeah, we are still fun to work with,
if it was really serious, then obviously you'd be serious. But when people are coming up to you something ridiculous, to keep a straight face when they're saying, yes, this has really bothered me. Somebody has got a plant that smells dodgy. And you're like... Really? Yeah. This has ruined your day? Okay, fine. Okay, should we do story number 3, the promotion that disappeared?
Oh, this is a common one.
This is like a Midsummer Murders. I was verbally promised a promotion by my manager 6 months ago. I've taken on extra responsibilities, worked longer hours, and even trained my replacement for my old role. Now my manager's acting like the conversation never happened and they've told me they're re-evaluating the structure. Can I file a grievance, or is this just the way that it is?
Oh dear, we've had this one so many times, and so many people actually don't realise how damaging this can be, especially if you've got a really key employee or someone that's been in the business for quite some time, because you don't just get someone in and then just automatically promote them. They have to go through that longevity to be able to get there in the first place, to a position of that level of responsibility perhaps. And it sounds to me like this person is going into what we call an entry-level line manager position, just from how they've worded it. But they can absolutely file a grievance in this case, because it causes so many problems, doesn't it? And it's not just a case of it's damaging to that one person. It might be that they say, right, okay, well, why do I have to do all of this work? I'll take my foot off the gas and I'll do the bare minimum. Like the chap was when we spoke in the confessions episode, where he said about his colleagues being dull, and that he, that he didn't find them very engaging and all of these sorts of things, but he can't get a better deal elsewhere. These are where these sorts of scenarios come from. So we do have to be really aware of what that actually looks like. So when people are going through salary reviews and they'll come to us and say, oh, well, we want to give such and such a pay rise, but we don't want to give this person a pay rise. The first question Faye and I will always ask is, well, why? Because you're not being consistent, first of all. So we always ask people to justify their decisions and why they're doing these things. But in this case, I actually feel really sad for that person. I know we've only got their view of it. We don't have the collective picture, but I really do feel for them, because it's actually happened to me multiple times where I've been overlooked and I've been given additional responsibilities, and I think most people can kind of relate to that scenario.
I feel like the manager feels like they can get away with giving them all of the extra work without the extra money. And they've said, we're thinking about you for a promotion. Will you take on all these extra responsibilities so that you can show that you can do the job? And now they're thinking, well, he's doing it. He seems quite happy. Do I have to kind of go through all of the rigmarole and give him more money when he seems to be doing the role anyway? So, it's not on, is it?
No.
I think this is the prime of dangling the carrot. So this person's working and working and working. They're showing their best effort. They're putting their best foot forward. Take on this workload. You'll get a promotion. Absolutely, I will. Take on the workload. Do the extra hours. And 6 months has gone and there is no promotion, I'm guessing, in title, and possibly no promotion in pay. So you're getting somebody to do more but for less. So why are the company feeling that they have to do that? Well, because it's the right thing to do. That's why.
Yeah.
So stop dangling the carrot to these, these really good eggs, your steady eddies of the company, and actually give them what they're worth.
Put your carrot away and stop messing about.
Yeah.
Okay, here's scenario number 4, the fridge police. I knew there was going to be one about fridges. Fridges come up so often. We have a shared office fridge, and there's one colleague who's basically declared themselves the fridge police. They leave notes about how long leftovers can stay, they reorganise everyone's food, and they even threw out my lunch before it expired because they didn't like the smell. I'm fed up. Do I have a case for HR?
I mean, they've given themselves the badge, the fridge police badge.
Do they have a high vis as well?
I'm curious how this was nominated, or they just decided to go forth. But let's just stay away from people's lunches for one. I mean, don't get me wrong. If you see gone off milk in there, absolutely throw it away. But I wouldn't start reorganising and touching people's lunches. I don't believe that's fair. But I it's hard, isn't it? Because obviously people are feeling somewhat disgruntled by this. I'm sure it's not just their lunch that's been touched. It's going to be multiple that use the fridge. But you got to also look at the possibility of kind of contamination. Who's got what in what lunch? Do they put it at the bottom because there's things in it? Someone could have allergies. I don't know. There's such a multitude. I think this is a gripe. I'm not sure it's quick for HR to jump in on this. I think this could be easily resolved. And let's remove the fridge police badge from said person, for one.
Well, it's easy to say that, but when somebody dies of food poisoning and you said this is a gripe, and somebody's left chicken in there that's gone off and it's dripped bits of diseased chicken juices all over somebody's fromage frais, then how's that going to work out? But I think a lot of the time you get stuff in the fridge which is in a grey area, so nobody claims responsibility, and that's when and like places I've worked, things have been like, museums would be interested in some of these historical objects. You just discover at the back a tub of hummus from like 2003, and you just think, how's that happened?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's expired, if it's gone off, like I say about the gone off milk, because that's quite current, isn't it? That's happened a few times. Even where we work, sometimes there's milk and you just get rid of it, and that's fine because no one's going to utilise it. But obviously people put, I'm guessing from what they've said, people put their bits and pieces for lunch in the fridge how they would, so it's organised and where it needs to be. But if you have this fridge police going in and then manoeuvring it all, that's a problem, isn't it? Yeah. Would you want somebody touching your lunch and moving it to the top shelf from the bottom?
But if you were the fridge police person and you really felt strongly about people leaving food in the fridge that was going off, is it better to use the passive aggressive post-it note method and put a sticker on people's food saying this has gone off, I'm going to throw it away in a week if you don't?
Yeah, I've got the whole Ross from Friends in my head going, my sandwich. We have there's so much that you've got to think about. It's not just being a good office and having a fridge in the first place. You've got to think about, well, actually, do people have allergies? You can't just have something these days. You have to think about all the risks that are associated with it.
But is that not the person with the allergies' responsibility to say to everybody, right, I'm going to be using the fridge, please nobody bring any peanuts or something?
Yeah, definitely. And more often than not, people like that will have their own, they tend to keep it separate or contained within a particular container or a lunchbox or something. They wouldn't just throw a sandwich in there. But, just make it easy for yourselves. Every Friday, just clean it out. And anything that's left in there, just put a note on there to say, right, on a Friday, it's all going. Because that's what we had when Faye and I worked in a business centre. Every Friday, it would just be cleaned out by the cleaner if there was anything left in there, and that was it.
Yeah, that would infuriate me, because I like to leave stuff in the fridge and eat it. Because I might have a bag of Baby Bells that lasts for 3 weeks that I keep in the fridge. Or I might have cans of Coke. People always nick those. I hate
that's
that.
true.
I don't trust my cans of Coke.
You'd have to start labelling it.
Yeah.
Yeah, stop stealing Chris's cans of Coke.
Oh, I actually did that. I just did right. No, that said, this is Chris's Coke. Stop stealing it, you
naughty people.
Yeah, it was very clear, and they stopped after that.
Yeah, no, I get that. It is infuriating. I think things like that with Baby Bells and Cokes and things like that, I know that people used to just put a little note in there to say that it was for the following week, because you don't want to take it all out and then put it all back in on the Monday. So yeah, no, I can completely get that. But I mean, things that are like what I'd call perishables, like...
Yeah, you got no sense of hummus when it comes to that.
No.
Strawberries.
No, we don't stand for that.
Strawberries that have grown fur. Something.
Oh, no.
Yuck.
That's put us off our lunch.
Yeah, there's a season for strawberries, and it often expires when the strawberries do. Okay, so we're going to talk about compliance now and policies. I love you guys love a policy, don't you? But why are policies important?
Policies are important, and they're there to serve a purpose. We don't do HR for HR's sake. We're not going to get a fridge police policy, that's for sure. But I'm giving people ideas now. Please don't do that. So we actually need something in place to make sure that people don't just wing it. So we're seeing a lot of tribunals through the tribunal system at the moment where people are abiding to the law, but they're losing their cases because they haven't adhered to their own policy, because they don't know it.
So the policy is the thing that they've fallen down on. Their own policy has come back to bite them.
Yes. Yeah, their own policies. That's what's landing them in the hot water at the moment. So if you do have something that is above and beyond what we call statutory, so... investigation meetings, you don't automatically have the right to be accompanied, but in some places like educational trusts or within certain private areas, they will have, or in the NHS, for example, they do have the right to be accompanied in some of the sites. But it's not an automatic right. But if you put that in there and then you don't offer that person the right to be accompanied in their investigation meeting, or you say that you have to write to them to invite them in for an investigation meeting, you're just setting yourself up. Just keep it simple. You don't have to go and do all of the things or download random policies off the internet. We find that a lot.
Yeah, and they haven't even read them, and
No.
they don't realise that there's things that they have to then do.
No, and it's having that knowledge and awareness. We're not expecting everybody to know everything, but if something does pop up, what we do say to our clients is like, ring us, and then Faye and I go, oh, by the way, can we have a copy of your policy, please? And then they'll send it to us, and we're like, right, these are the steps that you need to take. But you do find that there are certain enhancements because people have downloaded random policies off the internet, or they've got it from a previous employer that they were part of, but it's not fit for purpose when it translates from a large business to a small one. So knowing your policies, and you don't have to know the ins and outs of it, but just know the basis of it, and then at least you've got something to work with. But just don't wing it, because that's what's causing all of the problems in the employment space at the minute.
Yeah, and the moment where you need to write those important letters, check the policies or get an expert in to help you with it.
Yeah,
because,
absolutely. Yeah, don't wing it. It's like me trying to do my own accounts. Gosh, no, I can't be trusted. No, so I can't even be trusted in Starbucks alone, let alone with my own accounts. So it's one of those where you have to make sure that you've got the right people supporting you in your business and protecting it. So yeah, no different to having a decent accountant.
Okay, we have a quick HR horror story now. So we're going to share the worst grievances you've ever experienced. Now I think these are going to be Halloween standard.
Yeah, I think so. So with, I'm trying to think, because there are so many that I've dealt with. The bin one, I think, with it just being once, is a real standout for me. But then you've got, I'm trying to anonymise it in the best way that I can. I had one over an employee bringing in a banana to work, and she didn't eat it. She just put it on her desk to annoy her colleague who had a genuine phobia of bananas. Now, I didn't know that existed until I heard screaming from the office. And I dashed outside and said, oh my gosh, what's going on? And they said, oh, such and such, you are aware that she's scared of bananas, right? And then there's this woman with a Cheshire cat-sized grin on her face saying, I got her good today, didn't I? And that grievance took me three and a half months to resolve.
But how can you prove that she hadn't brought that banana in to eat?
Right, because she admitted it.
Okay.
She did it to play a prank to see if her phobia was genuine. Now, I don't know where the phobia stemmed from. It took me 3 months, or about 3.5 months to resolve it, because the person actually went off with work-related stress at that point, and that's when you see a direct escalation point. So yeah, and often it's just overlooked, but there's certain things that we do from a professional perspective that help to mitigate that risk. So again, having the right people in sooner rather than later is really important. But yeah, that was probably the worst one that I've ever dealt with.
I think that's really shocking, and it might seem funny because it's a banana, but actually when you're scared of something, it's terrifying, obviously. And if you imagine what you're scared of and being put in that situation, if you were scared of snakes and you came to work and somebody had put like a massive anaconda on your desk, or a tarantula was suddenly crawling on your head, or suddenly, if you're scared of heights, you're on the top of a cliff top and you're about to fall down. These things are really scary. Yeah. And something has obviously happened with the banana at some point in her childhood or their past that's traumatized her, and that might be really, really awful for her.
Yeah, I think so. But this woman was genuinely terrified, and it took me ages to get her back to work, and then I had to do the usual protocol of making sure no one had bananas on the desk, or if they brought one in with their lunch, to put it away in their desk. These are... It brings me back to a quote from, the US office, when Michael Scott says to the HR person, like, why is it whenever I try to do something fun, you make it not that way? So hopefully that can explain the method to the HR madness in very simple terms as to why we have to do things in the way that we do it. We can't just brush it off and go, oh, it was just a laugh, Barbara was only joking. It doesn't work that way. There's so many... When you're dealing with individuals, there are so many variations, and the way one person reacts versus another is very unique. So, we don't see... everything that we see is just that everything's different every day. So we just, it's never the same.
Wow. I mean, I never even thought about bananas that way, but now, and was it just bananas, or
As far as I'm aware,
were,
yeah, there
were
was
they
no...
bothered by the minions or yellow cars? Or...
No, not that I'm aware of. It was just some sort of banana phobia. I don't know if she didn't say whether it was an allergy or not. It definitely wasn't an allergy, but she was just genuinely scared of them. So we do get the strange and wonderful in HR. So we get to see so many things.
Well, do you know, bananas can be fatal. If you eat 10 bananas, I think you die because they've got potassium in them and it's poisonous.
Do you? Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. I don't know if it's 10, it might be 100 or 1,000. But if you eat enough bananas...
I'm going to Google that later.
Yeah.
I'll look it up. I'll put it on the episode notes just to if anyone's concerned.
All of our listeners are going to be Googling now.
Bananas.
How many bananas does it take for you to overdose on them?
It might have been on QI or something. I'm sure they said something about bananas.
Yeah, we're definitely Googling that.
Very, very dangerous. Okay, so we're... Oh, Faye, have you got an HR horror story about a grievance?
That I'm not going to top the banana, am I? Let's
top
face
banana.
it. So yeah, no, nothing is weird and wonderful, unfortunately.
Okay, no, that's fine. Let's move on quickly. So appeals. Now we're going to talk about appeals. The appeals process, which is obviously a big part of the grievance procedure, that sometimes people feel like they haven't been treated fairly and they go to an appeal. Is that something... I mean, I always feel that what's the point? It's going to be done by the same men in suits that have made the first decision. It's just a box-ticking exercise. There isn't really a right to appeal because you'll just get exactly the same answer. Is that often the case?
Well, the idea behind it is the person that then holds the appeal is completely different and impartial from those that have previously been in any investigation or the grievance piece before that. So the appeal should be as fresh as the first grievance initially. So somebody else with their view and being objective will, basically see the outline and come to their own conclusion without being swayed. The idea behind this is that if you offer an appeal, which most times you are obliged to do, make sure it is not just for show that you've said, hey, you've got 5 days to appeal it. Make sure you actually offer it and carry it through. Because so many times we see people go through the grievance, possibly get an outcome, which, by the way, you are obligated to have to do, but some companies choose not to. But then they'll take it to the appeal stage that they're not happy, and then it kind of goes dead in the water. And we've seen that a few times with really big companies that just don't adhere to best practice. So they've offered the appeal, they've heard the appeal, and they've chosen to do nothing with it. And that is really, really concerning. So my advice is if you offer it, which you have to do, please see it through and give that person their outcome that they would like.
Yeah, it's not... I think it's not always giving the employee what it is that they want. Whenever Faye and I go into grievances, we'll always ask the same question towards the end, and that is, what is your desired outcome as part of this process? Sometimes we get a very vague answer, whereas I just want to be treated fairly, which... okay, is fine if you're looking at things such as discriminatory cases or something that's led by disproportionate treatment. But then when you're looking at, the bin being emptied and things like that, it's all very relative and treating that case very much individually rather than it being, oh, okay, so I've treated this case, a similar case way back when, I'll just treat it in exactly the same way. We can't. We have to look at it all upon its merit and the way that it works. So when we talk to people and we're asking them what it is that they want, and if anybody that's listening wants to raise a grievance or has been thinking about doing it, please make sure that you've got that answer in mind, because it's all well and good stating that you've got all of these issues, but what do you want to come from that process? And sometimes we do get really unreasonable answers from people where they're like, I don't want to work with that person anymore. Well, that's not always, if... For example, Chris, if Faye had raised a grievance to me saying, well, I'm not happy with how Chris is, whatever opinion that looks like, if I come to you and say, oh, well, you can't work with Faye anymore, Chris, because Faye's not happy with you, first of all, you're going to go, well, hang on a minute, what is it that I've done? So that's why you go through a correct process. That's why you look at things objectively and with eyes wide open, rather than it being, right, I know this person, I know that person's totally done that. And then you just build that case around that knowing or that bias where I know that they've done that. So having that open mind is so important whenever anyone goes into it. And if there's line managers that are listening and they may be friends with people because they've come up through the ranks of the organisation, the one thing that I always say is that if there is that potential for conflict of interest because you go down the pub with Dave every Friday afternoon, it's probably best if you remove yourself from that situation and allocate another manager to it if the organisation's big enough. Yeah,
because I bet a lot of conversations happen down the pub or after work or in an informal setting that actually have a real impact on what goes on in the office, and particularly with grievances and things like that.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah. Okay, so how about companies ignoring the grievance but instead just punishing the employee without actually going through all the processes? Is that a thing? Does that happen nowadays?
Yeah, that's what Faye and I will call a face palm moment.
Yeah.
So very much like your wife's emoji, we will be sat there in the office like that going, why have you done that? And you sit there and you're like, actually, is this our job sometimes? Because to us it seems glaringly obvious, and they know that what they should do, but what they try to do is to get it off their desk as quickly as possible. That's what it comes down to. So yeah, we see it quite often, and unfortunately that leaves the employee escalating things, and that's where we then start seeing people raising more serious claims or possibly going through ACAS for early conciliation. They might be asking for a mutual termination, a settlement agreement to leave. And that's really it is quite hard because, again, if you're not following your right processes and things like that, you're not leading by example, which then as a manager reflects on you, and they'll say, oh, don't bother raising that to Steve because Steve's not going to deal with it. So yeah, it's difficult because it kind of absolves that responsibility, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Do you have to do everything through those sort of channels though? Because if it's just a quick gripe, can you deal with it in the office without going down the whole HR route and just say, look, I'm just gonna, or just get you both in, bang your heads together and say, right, go back to work, stop messing around? Or do you always have to follow the procedures?
Yeah, Faye's really good at that bit.
You absolutely can do the informal approach. The first thing that we would suggest is to have that conversation, bring both parties in if they're open and willing to conversation, and just try and deal with it in an informal way without having to take it through the formal grievance process. And just seeing if that could be resolved, because quite quickly, once you've actually had a conversation and you can see where the other person's coming from, it can kind of be dissolved in that moment. If they're not happy or satisfied with the outcome of it being informal, that's when then they can go to somebody then more senior and say, I'm not happy with that. I want to raise this as a formal grievance because, one, I don't feel that you've taken it seriously, and two, I do not feel like you have satisfied what I want to see. It is, as Natalie mentioned before, the outcome of what you want from this. So we can quite quickly see how that can then escalate to a more formal procedure. But yeah, absolutely, just bring them in. And whilst we wouldn't advertise actually banging their heads together, we would suggest that they shake hands politely afterward
in a non-sexual harassment kind of way.
Yeah. Kind of like a high five, maybe. Would that work?
Yeah, a cheesy high five is just fine. Yeah.
Do companies somehow make it about people's behaviour rather than a specific grievance? And is that wrong, or can it sometimes be about people's general behaviour?
Sometimes it's about behaviour. Sometimes we've seen grievances come across the desk where somebody it can be a bit more serious. For example, in childcare settings, we see a lot about safeguarding. We also see quite a bit in terms of, or what we're seeing an increase in is whistleblowing, where people feel that there is such a serious disclosure, either for health and safety reasons, for example, that they then feel that they want to protect themselves by raising a grievance. So yeah, it's not straightforward. It does get rather juicy when it comes to these things.
Have you got any examples of companies just doing something really ridiculously wrong with this?
Oh,
I mean, well, one thing is the whole procedural piece. So I have seen that somebody raised a grievance, and then there was kind of like an outcome, shall we say, but there was nothing actioned, nothing actually done of what they said the outcome would be. So an appeal came forward. The appeal went in, but instead of dealing with that and following that process through, they decided to kind of interject, pause that, give no outcome, and decide to almost witch hunt said employee. And that was by going around the team and pulling as much information about any, historic behaviour, conduct or anything to kind of build a case to almost put this person through a disciplinary as opposed to actually dealing with the outcome to their grievance. That's wrong. Because you need to finalise each of these procedures. You cannot just stop and interject and come up with your own kind of, I hate to mention it as a witch hunt, but, kind of almost targeting an employee to say, no, this is your wrongdoing, this is, and putting the blame back on them.
Yeah.
And that's not right.
Is that gaslighting? I've heard that term. I think where you make somebody feel like if they don't toe the line, terrible things are going to happen because you can make their life a misery if they speak out against your company.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, some managers will haul you into a room and, there's 3 or 4 of them sat round saying, you're not going to take this any further, are you? And we know that that's been done.
Yeah.
And it's almost that kind of, it depends on the person. So somebody might be bolshy enough to say, actually, I am, and walk back out the room and go and seek help from either a union, HR, or just somebody else that can help them. Other people might succumb to that, unfortunately, and think, oh, I daren't tell, anybody about their grievance or take it or escalate it further with fear of their own reprimand.
I think it's scary because sometimes it's so hard to prove because this process might happen, it might get resolved, and then a month later, you get made redundant and you know that it's because of that, but you can't ever prove it.
Yeah, and this is the thing, and this is why it's so incredibly difficult, and this is why we go back to the fair and consistency. Somebody has a problem, we have to be open to listen. It isn't about, the blame game and who's done this and who's done that. Let's just find a resolve so we can all move forward. And when I say we, I mean the company, the person involved, the employee. So it's more harmonious. We don't need this targeted approach to poke people and say you're wrongdoing, you're sacked because you brought something forward. It's not the way.
No, and we do see it more often than not. A lot of people are quite surprised. Normally, Faye and I get involved at the point where it has escalated beyond informal resolve. So we then have to manage that piece. It can escalate really quickly, especially if it's downplayed a lot by a manager. We've seen recently people going as far as ripping up health and safety reports when there's been a reportable incident on site, and because that person had raised a grievance, they've then ripped it up and thrown it in the bin and said, yeah, that didn't happen, in front of the employee.
Wow.
So we do see the other side of things, but Faye and I are those people that if ever we go anywhere, people will always ask us, oh, can we just ask you a quick HR question? So, we tend to go for lunches and stuff where people don't come up to us, or we're going to be recognised by friends and family and distant people that know us that will then say, oh, can I just ask you a quick question? Because otherwise it just ends up going from there, and before we know it, they've ended up settling out of their businesses and all sorts of things. So we're normally on the other side of the table. Our job there is to protect the employer from getting these processes wrong in the first place. So for us, when we get friends and family and people ask us HR related questions, it's quite different for us to be sat on the other side, so to speak.
So interesting. So hopefully that's been a useful kind of, so there's so much to think about, isn't there?
Yeah.
What would you say if we were going to sort of distill today's podcast down to a few key tips? What are the main sort of takeaways from all of this?
For me, it's just simply get your processes right. Make sure that you know what your policies and your procedures look like, but also just don't wing it. That if you wing it, it escalates really quickly because you think you've done the right thing, but it's essentially you're just getting a JCB when initially you should have just been using a spoon. So let's just keep it clean. Don't do the HR for HR's sake. Just get the process right and everything's good.
My little boy, who's 4, has a little toy digger, and sometimes he eats his food with the JCB. So
like
it is
that.
possible to use that as a spoon.
Yeah,
Just saying.
Okay, I'll bear that in mind.
Take
Yeah.
that with a pinch of salt. Okay, so if you organise a process, you need to stick to it and don't retaliate against people just for speaking up is kind of like the main message, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, amazing. So we want to hear your funniest or your wildest grievance stories. So if you've got something to share on this topic, then please do get in touch, because in the next episode we'll have a look at some of those and kind of discuss whether it was as ridiculous as you think it was, or maybe you might have missed something. But I think it'll be really interesting to get a few examples and some interesting stories of when people have had a bit of beef at work.
Yeah, there's always beef. Every day we walk into fresh beef, Chris. So, it just depends on the weather. Normally when the sun comes out, people are a lot nicer and there's less beef. But, you know, it's been a dark grey winter, so we've got enough beef to keep us going until like September. So
Getting into the HR spring now, people are going to have a bit of springtime beef.
Yeah.
Easter egg traumas.
Oh gosh.
no.
That'll be the next thing.
Yeah, we've actually had things like that happen where people aren't happy because they don't want Easter eggs distributed at work and things like that. So, yeah, there's a lot to talk about on that. We're not going to get into the politics of Easter eggs.
People have beef about everything, don't they? There's no single thing that doesn't cause problems, even Easter eggs.
And
there
I
we
think
go.
sometimes if some people want it, they'll find it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't need to really be rhyme or reason. If they want a problem, they'll find it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today, and we will see you on the next episode of HR Unboxed. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you.